Lance Stroll has had yet another disastrous race in Mexico, and this time it wasn't even his fault, as the car didn't manage to get to its optimum operating window. But this sole reason is why the Canadian driver might not actually have a bright future in this sport, because if the car fails to perform on a certain level, then it's more likely than not that Stroll will be out of an F1 seat sooner rather than later, as his teammate Alonso has managed to absolutely shatter his dreams in Aston Martin. With Lawrence tipped to exit Aston Martin due to a lack of motivation and trouble with the investors of the team, and with the downhill slope of the Silverstone-based team's upgrades, is this the beginning of the end of Lance Stroll? It's safe to say that this season hasn't been kind to Lance Stroll, but for the majority of the time, he had no one to blame but himself. Him being put in this situation is exactly what led to the scenario having no pressure to perform better, knowing that your father owns the team and there is no way that you would potentially get fired. However, those circumstances seem to have shifted a bit for two reasons. The first being that the potential of the car started to drop, and the second being that Lawrence Stroll is slowly but surely losing interest in leading the Aston Martin team into the future, as the first issues with the investors have already surfaced. Now, one of the talking points between the investors of Aston Martin and Lawrence Stroll is the longevity and motivation of his son Lance, and his potential to compete up front as his teammate Fernando Alonso. Obviously, winning 6 podiums in the first 8 races and a grand total of 7 so far in the 2023 season is an achievement that Alonso could have only dreamt about at the age of 43. But the sudden drop in performance goes to show that this might all go down very rapidly. And while he will definitely be considered a solid starting driver for any other team out there, his teammate Stroll might not have the same amount of luck. What adds more fuel to the fire is that the team principal of Aston Martin, Mike Crack, has finally admitted that Lance is feeling a lot of pressure to perform in the past couple of races, something that's not been the case in the previous months, and especially in the beginning of the season when his teammate was absolutely shattering Mercedes on his own. Elaborating on this matter further, Crack said, "Lance got a beating from the press for 3 or 4 months. So it was very good that he got a good result in Austin and that the situation calmed down for the time being. The pressure is increasing internally. It's also difficult for the team because then every little mistake is taken into account. And I'm glad that we came back a little bit for him, but also for the team, for everyone." But what Crack forgot to emphasize, or didn't just want to bother with it, is the fact that Lance has scored points in one of the last 5 races, the Austin GP, and the deficit between him and Alonso is currently standing at 130 points. This is one of the biggest margins between teammates, and before Verstappen made a solid run for P1 and proved everyone that Perez is no match for him, the gap between Alonso and Stroll used to be the highest one on the grid. This is something that Nico Rosberg has spoken about as well, and when talking about this matter, the 2016 world champion feels like until this matter is resolved, there won't be any improvements from Lance's side, which effectively has the opportunity to ruin his future F1 career. Furthermore, Nico said, "It's a difficult situation with Lance and Aston Martin. If he wasn't the son of the man who owns the team, then he wouldn't be driving at this level next year. But of course, it's a different situation because the father owns the team, and you shouldn't forget that in theory, he can drive the car." But as I mentioned earlier in this video, Lance Stroll no longer has a competitive car that he can count on if he decides to perform strongly all of a sudden. And according to Alonso, this will not change for the remainder of 2023. What this will do is that the gap between Lawrence and Fernando will be deepened even further, and Lance might get overtaken by both Alpine drivers in the Drivers' Championship, which will then put the last nail in his coffin named the F1 career of Lance Stroll. When talking about the performance of the car, Alonso wasn't shy of any words, as he added, "The truth is, it has been difficult. We've been a little slow all weekend in Mexico. In all the sessions we've suffered, so the time trial has not been a surprise to suffer and fall behind. Yesterday we spun in the high-speed corners. Today we spun again in the first sector. The car is always on the knife's edge of losing it. So we have quite a few complications. And well, we have to suffer and we have to understand to return to our best level, which logically is not what we're showing now." And one couldn't help but notice that the issue with Lance is way deeper than what we're currently seeing right now, as many are noticing that his love for the sport just isn't there. Throughout the press conferences, there have been lots of situations in which Lance just showed a lack of interest, and most of the time, you could tell from his face that he would have been somewhere else in that moment. Lance's mother has always been supportive of her son looking for another sports career, such as tennis, as Formula One was not always his passion, and throughout time, we've heard statements from different people who got to work with his father and Lance, saying that they've never seen such a duo of a motivated father and a disinterested son. Christian Danner, a former F1 racer and a current broadcaster, believes that according to Stroll's disposition in the paddock and his dealings with the media, the Canadian driver is lacking what every other colleague of his has, a true love for the sport and the profession. Elaborating on this matter even further, Christian said, "If someone approaches the matter with such listlessness, then there is a lack of fundamental love for this profession, for this privilege of being allowed to drive a Formula One car. I don't see that in him by a long shot. The fact is that Stroll is underperforming. I, as Lance Stroll, a grown man, do I want to continue being a racing driver? He has to make the decision for himself. Do I have room for improvement here? Is there something going forward? If so, what do I have to do for that?" Furthermore, Christian found a very interesting motivation to which Stroll could turn to. His fellow compatriot Nicholas Latifi, as he was also present in the sport for quite some time and was heavily underperforming in Williams, but the only reason the team kept him was because of his father's money through Sofina, one of the team's primary sponsors. The situation does bear a resemblance between the two of the drivers, and considering the fact that Latifi did indeed pursue a career outside of F1, studying business in London, it's not the end of the world if you're not tailor-made for an F1 seat. At the end of the day, there are many drivers out there who would kill to have a car like Lance has, even though it's been on the receiving end of things for quite some time in the previous period. Aston Martin did strike a deal with Honda from 2026 onwards, and with the current development of things, Honda might have regretted the decision, but it's already too late, and the least they could do is pursue the Silverstone-based squad to give their academy driver a seat, Yuki Tsunoda. This is a matter that's also been discussed by Helmut Marko, who did acknowledge the risk of having their driver poached away from AlphaTauri, and he did put a large emphasis on the current factual situation. Yuki is currently under contract with the Italian squad, and if Aston Martin were to make a move, they would have to go through them first. Elaborating on this matter, Marko said, "Tsunoda is under contract with us. If Aston Martin were interested in him as early as next year, they would first have to come to an agreement with us." Be that as it may, the future of Stroll is anything but secured, and if there is one thing that he could do in the last 3 races, as well as at the beginning of 2024, it's to start performing like his life depends on these races. Otherwise, the investors in Aston Martin might not actually have the patience until 2026, not after what they saw the car is capable of in the first half of the season. So, do you think that Lance is done and dusted with Formula One as a sport? Let us know in the comments down below.